this evening. And then we're not just here to talk, we're here to hear from you, a time for you to ask questions. So after about 30-40 minutes of a presentation, we're going to ask questions. You can put all your questions in the chat box. Our colleagues from CAHN are available and they will be there to pass your questions on to the presenters. So please feel free to send any questions in the chat box as the event goes along. So I will not talk any further. I'm going to introduce Amy Stone and Kate to you this evening. Over to you, Amy and Kate, and thanks for joining this evening.
Hi everybody, nice to meet you all. Thank you for having us. If you bear with me a moment, we're just going to get our slides working and then we'll make a start. Okay, hopefully everyone can see that okay. So just to introduce us, I'm Kate Rose and this is my colleague Amy Stone. So I work in the sales and commercial team at One Manchester and Amy works in our right to buy team at One Manchester. So the schemes we're going to talk you through today are Help to Buy, Shared Ownership and Rent to Buy, and I'll take those three and then I'm going to hand over to Amy for Right to Buy and Right to Acquire. So the first scheme I'm going to speak to you then about is Help to Buy. So this product is unlike the others in that Help to Buy is not really a housing association led product. You'll see this more from private developers. So Help to Buy is a way for purchasers to basically buy a new build home. And this is where the government offer an equity loan of up to 20% cost of the home. Purchasers still need a 5% deposit and then would still need to arrange a mortgage for between 25 and 75% of the property, and the remaining 20% would come from the government equity loan. So the loan itself on this one is interest-free for the first 5 years, but after the 5 years, interest does start to be charged, and the interest that's charged is linked to the Consumer Price Index. Just to make you aware as well that the interest payments on this do not actually pay off the loan, they are literally interest only. The loan itself needs to be repaid in full after 25 years or when you come to sell the property, so whichever is soonest, but you can actually pay off the loan earlier if you're able to do so. Just to make you aware as well that the amount that you pay back is actually linked to the value of the property at the time it's repaid. So it's 20% of the value at the time it's repaid, not necessarily the amount that you originally borrowed, unless the value of the property remained the same. And just in the right-hand side there, I've just added a little breakdown in terms of what that would look like for a property with a sales price of £200,000. So the 5% deposit would be 10,000. Obviously, then you've got the 20% equity loan of 40,000 and the mortgage of the 75% for the rest of it, 150. So in terms of eligibility for this one, you must be a first-time buyer and the property that you're buying must be a new build property that's actually part of the Help to Buy scheme. It's not actually available on every single new build property. It does have to be part of this scheme. The way that you would know if it was or not is there's usually a Help to Buy logo on the site hoardings or on the website, or you would just check with the sales advisor or the developer on that one. There is actually a maximum purchase price for eligible properties, and that varies by location, but for the Northwest, the maximum purchase price is $224,000. You would need a minimum deposit of 5%. So going back to the example on the previous slide, if the house price was £200,000, you would need a minimum deposit of £10,000. And you would also need to be able to get a mortgage for the share that wasn't covered by the deposit or the equity loan. So in terms of how to apply for this one, the first step would be to find an eligible property. So you can search online for Help to Buy. You can look at sort of like developments to see if they're going up with this sign on the hoardings. You can also put a filter on Rightmove for new build properties. And like I say, you would just need to look for the Help to Buy logo to know if it qualified for this scheme. To apply for the scheme itself, you'd need to go through what we call the Help to Buy agent. So that's like an online thing, and it can usually be done quite fast. They ask you for quite a bit of information, you fill that in online, and they make a decision quite quickly and come back to you on that one. You'd need to provide details of your income and your savings, etc., because they would do an affordability assessment as part of the eligibility check as well. If you were approved for that, you would then actually apply for the equity loan, which the Help to Buy agent would help you to do, and then you would proceed with the purchase. So as with all the sales we'll talk about, you would still need to obtain a mortgage and you'd still need to instruct a solicitor to act for you. When the sale completes on these ones, there's no rent to pay. You would own the property outright. You would just need to pay the mortgage, and then after 5 years, you would need to start paying the interest on the loan as well. So the next one on the list is shared ownership. So lots of housing associations develop shared ownership properties, and it's a very affordable way to get onto the housing ladder. In a nutshell, you buy a share in the property and you rent the share that you don't own. So the rent that you pay would generally be 2.75% of the unowned equity. So again, going back to the example of the £200,000 house, if you bought a 50% share, the rent on that would be £229 a month. Because you're buying a share of the property rather than the full property, the deposit that you would need tends to be less than if you were buying on the open market. At the moment with shared ownership, you can buy a minimum share of 25% up to a maximum share of 75%. But that's going to change over the next couple of years, because with any properties that were funded after 2021, the minimum share is actually reduced to 10%, which should make it even easier for people to get on the housing ladder. The property that you buy under shared ownership will be sold to you on a lease initially, because you won't actually own the property outright at that point. You do usually have the opportunity to purchase further shares in the property, and in most instances, you can actually purchase up to 100% of the property. If the property is a house and you purchase up to 100%, the lease would normally fall away and you would own the house outright as a freehold property at that point. If it was an apartment, that lease would always remain, but the rent would fall away and you would just potentially pay a service charge. If you do decide to move in the future, you can still sell your house if it's shared ownership, and the options to do so are either you can sell the existing share that you own, or you can sell 100% of the property. So in terms of eligibility, you need to be a first-time buyer or you need to be returning to the property market. So what I mean by that is you may have sort of owned with an ex-partner previously, but you don't own currently. You don't have to be a first-time buyer in the traditional sense of the word, but you can't own another property when you apply for shared ownership. So your household income must be less than £80,000. This is the threshold for every area in the country with the exception of London, which is 90. And they put that income cap on there because shared ownership is designed for people that can't actually afford to purchase outright. Also, the property itself must be designated as a shared ownership property. So that could either be a new build property that's being developed for shared ownership, or it could also be a resale of a shared ownership property. So someone's bought shared ownership in the past, they've decided to move on and they're selling their share in that property. So although there is a minimum share that you can purchase, you must also maximise the share that you can purchase. So we would expect you to be buying the maximum share that you can afford, and that would be done by way of affordability assessment. And because it's a part rent, part buy scheme, you would also need to evidence as part of the application process that as well as being able to afford the mortgage, that you could also afford the rent and any service charge. So how to apply for this one? The next steps would be to find the shared ownership property in the first instance. So shared ownership properties will generally be advertised on housing associations' websites if they're developing them. There's usually an option to sort of see what's ongoing on site at the moment and to register your interest. But there's also advertisements on Rightmove and Zoopla and things like that, and you can usually apply a filter for shared ownership that way. You would generally register your interest with the housing association, and you would also apply via the Help to Buy agent. So the Help to Buy agent in this instance will ask you for details of your household as well as your income, and they will assess your affordability for shared ownership. Again, it's a quick process, it's done online, and you usually get a decision within a few days or not. Providing you're eligible, you then go on to get some independent financial advice, and that would help you establish how much of a share that you could purchase. And they would also help you to get an agreement in principle or a mortgage offer at that stage as well. At One Manchester, we use a company called Metro Finance, and they do that independently of us. But again, there's no obligation to use those. You could use whoever you wanted to. You would then reserve the property, instruct a solicitor, and complete on the sale. Okay, so the last one I'm going to speak to you about today is rent to buy. So rent to buy is a scheme designed for people that have got an aspiration to purchase, but are not necessarily in a financial position to purchase immediately, usually because the person doesn't have the deposit saved up at that point. So rent to buy properties are rented to people at 80% of the market rent for the area. So that means ideally the people can then save 20% towards a deposit, enabling that person to buy the property in the future. So on rent to buy, you would rent the property for up to 5 years, at which point you would either purchase the property you're living in, or you would move out and find alternative accommodation to either carry on renting or to purchase elsewhere. There's no legal obligation to purchase the property that you're renting, and you are able to move out before the end of that 5 years as well. You're not tied into a 5-year tenancy, but it is a great opportunity to kind of buy the house that you're living in, so people can invest there and they've got that security that they know they can actually own the end of the term. So in terms of eligibility for this one, to qualify, you must be a working household with an aspiration to purchase in the future. The same as shared ownership, your household income must not exceed £80,000, and you must also be a first-time buyer or returning to the property market. You'd need to undertake an affordability assessment, and that would be evidence that you can actually afford to pay the rent and also afford to save up for a deposit for a future purchase. And again, like with the other ones, it must be a scheme where the property is actually designated as right to buy. So that could be a new build scheme that a housing association's built for a right to buy, or it could also be a re-let on a rent to buy property that someone's actually moved into, decided against purchasing, and then we're re-letting that property again as rent to buy. So in terms of how to apply for that one, the application process would vary between housing associations, but in general, you would find the property usually on the housing association website, or again via Rightmove or a Google search, and you would complete a rent to buy application with the housing association. You then go through a referencing process to check that it was affordable for you and that you had the right to rent, etc. At that point, if everything was okay, you would pay the first month's rent and also a deposit on the property, and then you would move in. So the only thing that really differs in terms of the tenancy while you're living there is because it is a rent to buy property, there would be an annual discussion with the housing association just in terms of, how you're getting on with your savings plan and what your plans are for purchase in the future. So I'm conscious that I've thrown a lot of information at you there, so I'll put some useful links in here as well. So just around sort of information on the different schemes, the links there to the Help to Buy agent and also Metro Finance if anyone wanted any more information on mortgages, etc. So that's my part finished, and I'll hand over to Amy.
Okay, so I will now explain the right to buy and right to acquire to you. Okay, so who has the right to buy? So the right to buy is actually aimed at council tenants. So if you live in a council property, you will have the right to buy, but you could also have a preserved right to buy if you once lived in a council property that was then stock transferred to a housing association. The qualifying years for the right to buy is you must have lived in the property for 3 years or another housing association or local authority property for 3 years. So the right to acquire is for housing association tenants. This is what Manchester offer. We are a housing association. So our tenants who haven't come to us via a stock transfer are given the right to acquire. And again, the qualifying years is 3. So there are occasions when you are not able to exercise your right to buy or right to acquire. So if your property has been purpose built, so for example, if it's a bungalow or a sheltered accommodation, you would not be able to purchase that property. Or if you have a suspended possession order against your tenancy, this could be due to antisocial behaviour or rent arrears. And if you have legal problems with debt, so if you are undischarged bankrupt, you wouldn't be able to purchase the property. And if your property is up for demolition, so if you have been served a final demolition notice on your property, you are not able to exercise your right to purchase it. Before you apply for the right to buy or the right to acquire, there are things to consider. So when you apply, your housing association, well, specifically at One Manchester, we will provide you with the valuation report, but we will not do a structural survey for your property. So you should take into consideration and getting a structural survey done. As it says there, they're roughly, for a very basic one, around £300. But obviously, the more in depth somebody goes, the more the price increases. We would recommend that you get one so that you're aware of the property that you're purchasing and what repairs you may expect in the future. You also need to take into consideration legal fees. So you would be expected to appoint a solicitor to act on your behalf to do your conveyancing. Solicitors fees at the moment, roughly from what we're finding out from our tenants, are between £800 and £1,500. We tend to find that a solicitor that charges £800 does the very basics, and then a solicitor that charges £1,500 does everything for you and explains the ins and outs of everything. We also recommend that you consider what your mortgage fees would be. So when you apply for a mortgage, you have to pay fees. Sometimes these can be included into your mortgage, but with the right to buy and the right to acquire, if including these fees into your mortgage requires a deed of postponement, you wouldn't be able to do so. So when you look to apply, ensure that you could cover these costs outright if necessary. There's also long-term costs to consider. So the property that you're buying is not likely to be a new build property unless you're very, very lucky. So you need to think about things such as the repairs and maintenance for the property. You need to consider buildings insurance for your house and then contents insurance for both house and flats. And if you're purchasing a flat, you need to consider the service charges and ground rents and any major works that may be happening to the structure throughout the next few years. How long does the process take? So when you apply, everything starts with the application. You will apply to purchase the property, and then as set out in the legislation is a timeline. So when you first apply, your landlord has 4 weeks to respond to you to admit or deny your application. So like we said before, your application would only be denied based upon the reasons previously given. So usually what you'd expect to see is that your application would be admitted. When your application is admitted, you will receive a letter letting you know that you have gone on to restricted repairs, and a valuer has been instructed to come and value your property. This valuation can take up to 8 weeks for a house and 12 weeks for a flat. Once that valuation has been conducted, a valuation report is sent back to your housing association, and they will put together your offer and send that out to you. Once you've got that, you then have 12 weeks to decide what you want to do. In an ideal world, you're in a position to accept the offer, and once you accept the offer, we would go to solicitors, and it roughly can take anywhere between 6 and 8 weeks for completion. Right to buy. So the right to buy offers a percentage-based discount. So you get 35% for your first 5 years, and then you get 1% for every year after that. At the moment, the cash cap amount that you can have is 87,200. So if you were somebody who had a 70% discount, if that 70% meant that the amount of discount you receive exceeded 87,200, you would be capped at 87,200. And then for London, it's 116,200. That does change every year in accordance with the consumer index. And then the discount is calculated differently for flats. So with flats, you get 50% for your first 5 years and then 2% every year after that. This goes up by 2% each year, with the maximum discount being 70%. And then I should have changed that in the presentation, but I've just noticed that I've missed it. Again, the maximum for the flats is also 87,200 and then 116,200 in London. With the right to acquire in Greater Manchester, the discount are as shown on the screen. So Greater Manchester Stockport is £11,000. So, and Greater Manchester, so Trafford, and Manchester in general, so Gorton, Longside, all of One Manchester areas, our discount is £10,000. And then for other areas such as Bolton, Bury, Oldham, Salford, Teesside and Wigan, it's £9,000. That is the same regardless of how many years you've lived in the property. And I don't believe that it's changed since it actually came out, to be honest. So during the process, you can disagree with the valuation of your property. So if you disagree with the valuation of your property, you would ask for a redetermination from the district valuer. Essentially what happens is your landlord will request a valuation from the district valuer. Now the district valuer does not work for One Manchester, they are employed by the valuation agency, and they will then contact you and they will provide you with 21 days to provide evidence to support why you disagree with the valuation of the property. Once they've had their evidence from you, they will also contact your housing association to ask them for any evidence they wish to submit. They will then come out and do a second valuation of your property, and they will change the price if they see fit. So it can go up, down, or stay the same. Once that price is changed, once that valuation has been carried out, your housing association will make you an offer based upon that valuation. And again, you would get another 12 weeks to place any funds if you wish to continue with the purchase. Now, at the moment at One Manchester, we're seeing delays of around 12 months for the district valuer. So they closed down during COVID and it's got quite a big backlog, but usually it does take around 4 months for that. With the right to buy and the right to acquire, once you've purchased your property, there are restrictions that are placed upon it. So the first restriction is the discount repayment. So you are free to sell your property at any time, but should you wish to sell it within the first 5 years, you will have to repay some or all of the discount. The amount you have to repay is based upon the valuation of your property at the time in which you go to sell it. You also must offer your housing association the right to first refusal for up to 10 years. So essentially what that means is before you look to sell your property on the open market, you must contact the housing association and ask them if they wish to buy it back first. Thanks for listening. Are we going to questions? Hello.
Hi, Amy. Elizabeth, did you want to say something? Sorry, I'm just putting my camera on.
Hi, thanks for that, Amy and Kate. Thank you for that. Yes, so thank you for the presentation. That was really insightful and very detailed. I believe some people have already started to put some questions in the chat box. So keep the questions coming through for those that are on Facebook and on YouTube as well. Keep those questions coming through. But yeah, we've got some questions on here, so I will just ask straight away, and feel free, Amy or Kate, to answer as they're coming in. So I'll just read here. So I think someone initially asked, is there any age limit on Help to Buy property? For example, over 60s, I think before you mentioned for those on over 18 as well. So if you have any, an input to that, please.
You would need to be over 18. In terms of an age limit, the idea of Help to Buy is that you wouldn't be able to buy a property on the open market without it. So you would be expected that you would need a mortgage for at least 25%. So the only way that the age limit would kind of work against people would be if the mortgage lender wasn't willing to lend to somebody at 60 years old. So it would very much depend on the mortgage lender. Some do, some don't.
Thank you for that, Kate. So I believe that answers your question for the person that put that question in the chat box. And then just going on to, how do you find shared ownership property in Manchester? Would you like to answer that question, Amy or Kate?
I mean, there's a lot of shared ownership property in Manchester at the moment. I know One Manchester ourselves are building a lot of it, and so are a lot of other housing associations. So probably maybe narrow down your area. And I would imagine a Google search of, say, shared ownership Gorton, shared ownership Levenshulme will bring you to housing association sites that are. If you've seen sort of like a property as you're driving around that you might be interested in or wondering if it's shared ownership, there would usually be something on the hoardings to suggest which housing association is developing it. And like I say, some people advertise on Rightmove, on Zoopla, and there's also a website called Share to Buy as well. But I think, you know, if there's housing associations that operate in your area, their websites are probably a good first point of call.
Thank you for that. So you've heard that here as well. There's different types of tools. So if you can also put some of those different links. I know that on one of your slides, Amy and Kate, it had some resources, some different links that people can go away and do some research on and use when it helps them in terms of their search, further search and research when it comes to Help to Buy schemes. And then the next question here is why is shared ownership mortgages more expensive than normal mortgages?
Why are they more expensive? I suppose that's a question for the mortgage lenders, in all honesty. I think it's more of a specialist product. So not every lender offers on shared ownership. So I guess, you know, again, I suppose it does really depend on the lender as to what their mortgage rates are. But because it is a specialist product, like I say, not everybody does it. So I suppose the pool is smaller for mortgage lenders that actually do it. So maybe they're not as competitive as normal mortgages that every lender does. But the idea of shared ownership is obviously you would need less mortgage because you're only buying a share in the property and you're not buying it outright.
Thank you for that, Kate. Thank you for the clarification on that as well. I think so I believe people are still typing in their questions. Once again, if you're joining with us, welcome to those that have just joined as well. And for those that are on Facebook and YouTube, if you have any additional questions for either Kate or Amy from One Manchester, they'd love to answer your questions. So keep them coming in the chat box. And we can answer that here as well. And then alternatively, if there's any links or anything as well, any resources that you feel we can all learn from together in our research for different housing schemes and pathways, please do share that in the chat box as well. Someone's asked here, between yourself, Amy and Kate, how is the rent calculated on the percentage not bought?
So the rent is, it's 2.75%. So say if you bought a property for £100,000 with full market value, so you bought 50% of that property, so you would get the mortgage for £50,000 and the rent would be based on the £50,000. So it would be 2.75% of that, and then that would be charged monthly. Apologies, I don't have a calculator with me, otherwise I would give you a worked example, but it's 2.75% of the rented share.
No problem. Oh, that's great. Yeah, not to worry. It was just, I think it's just good for people, just the rough numbers. It may not be the exact, but just rough numbers so people know how to, you know, when they're calculating that as well. If people, you know, have further questions, just keep, or any comments as well. We'd love to hear for some people's experiences as well. What are, you know, when people are looking as well, what are some of the areas people need help with? We'd love for people to post that in the chat box. I think someone has their hand raised. I'm just going to bring that person in, Amy and Kate, and then feel free to add any comments or feedback as well onto that. So Augustina, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for the presentation. I've not got a house yet. I'm still bidding. Those of us who are still bidding to get into the council house list, what's your encouragement? Or is there a different presentation to encourage us? Or is there enough houses for new families? Because it's quite difficult. It takes a while. Why does it take it so long for families to get a house?
So you're referring to bidding to get into a housing association property?
Yes, please. Yes, please.
It's just demand. There are people out there that need social housing, and it's done on a banded priority. I will say that that's not sort of mine or Kate's area of expertise, to be honest. We're just sort of selling them, but I'd suggest if you're looking for more information on that, to speak to the people that do things like Manchester Move, in terms of how you're prioritised in that list.
Yeah, most housing associations have like a housing options team or a lettings team, so it might be worth having a chat just to make sure that your circumstances are updated and you have got the right priority.
Oh, thank you. Thanks.
Thank you for that, Augustina. Yeah, if anyone would like to raise their hand as well, make a comment, share their experience, have any further feedback for Amy and Kate, that will be good. A question from YouTube, in the meantime, while people are putting in their questions, says, how much would you need to pay back to Help to Buy, the Help to Buy scheme, if that helps?
So on Help to Buy, the equity loan is for up to 20% of the property. So what you would borrow would depend on the sales price of the property, if that makes sense. So you would then have to pay back 20% of the value of the property when you came to sell it, or pay it back at the end of the 25 years. So you don't pay back the same figure as you borrowed, you pay back the same percentage that you borrowed. So if you borrow 20%, you would pay back 20%, but you would pay back 20% at the value at that time.
I hope that answers that person's question. Thank you for that. Thank you for the clarification, because I was getting quite confused as well in my search as well. So it's good to have that, insight. And
in value, you will end up paying more because it's 20% of the increased value. But again, I think I mentioned it in my slide, but if people's circumstances do change throughout that period, you can actually pay off up to 10% at a time, or you can pay off the full amount before the 25 years. So if circumstances change, you have got that option to do that.
Okay. Thank you for that, Kate. Another question has come in. If you have been living in the council house for 22 years, how do you calculate your discount?
So you would calculate that. So if you're in a house, you take your first 5 years, which gives you 35%. And then you've got 18 years left after that. So you would get 18% for those 18 years, add the 35 and the 18 together, 45, 50, 53% would be the percentage. But just bear in mind, if you're trying to calculate your own discount, that it is about your tenancy start date. It has to be full years. So if you're only 9 months into that year wouldn't qualify, and you'd get the percentage before that.
Does that answer that person's question? Feel free to unmute yourself if you
want. Thank you very much. Thank you. It makes things clear. Yeah.
Great. Thank you for that, David.
Thank you.
Yes. And thank you as well, Amy. That was really quick maths on the spot there. I'm really impressed. She calculated it so quickly. I was thinking, whoa, this is great.
It's not a finger tapping that goes on when I do it, really.
I'm really impressed. Thank you for that, Amy. So yes, let's keep the questions coming in. Again, we want to hear from you on the call. For those on Facebook, on YouTube, your shared experiences, any interaction, would be great, so that we can learn together as we're on the call. Another question, private question here, says, please can you, so the person's saying, what help is available for someone who is struggling to get a house on Manchester Move? And the current house won't be suitable for the family. Okay, so the person's put a really in-depth question, so I'll just read it. Yeah, what help is available for someone who's struggling to get a house on Manchester Move? The person is pregnant with multiple children, and the current house won't be suitable for the family when the children when they've given birth. This is causing worry and anxiety for the mother in question. Would you like to answer that, Amy, Kate?
I think, unfortunately, that probably is a question for Manchester Move. Neither Amy or I work on that side of the business with Manchester Move, so I wouldn't want to give anybody the wrong advice there. But again, it sounds like maybe speak to Manchester Move and just check that the priority is correct, that all your circumstances are updated with them and the application is as thorough as it can be. Because I know, obviously, you know, your circumstances dictate what band you're in. But again, that's not really an area that we deal in, unfortunately, so I wouldn't like to give anyone the wrong advice on that.
Thank you for that, Kate. And yeah, just to reiterate for those that have just joined in, this session is more focused from One Manchester's perspective in housing pathways. So please, you know, I know questions are coming in from different, you know, other housing providers. Please understand this is from One Manchester's perspective. So as we're answering questions, that's what we'll be focused on today. So for those that have just joined in, again, just reiterating that so that we're all aware, as Amy and Kate are answering questions, to take that into account, please. So yes, the next question for you, Amy and Kate, is from you, coming in from YouTube, saying, what with the current house prices raising, you may pay back more than what you will you pay back more than what you borrowed? I think again that was you've already answered that question.
Yes, again, I suppose if it's a shared ownership property and prices rise, you benefit from that rise if you do come to sell the property. If it's Help to Buy and prices rise, then unfortunately you would be paying back 20% of the higher value. So it depends on which scheme you're interested in, really, as to whether it would be a good thing or a bad thing.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that, Kate. Does anyone else have any other questions? Please keep them coming. For those that are on Facebook, YouTube, I know some of you have just joined. We really want to hear from yourselves. For those that are on the call, would anyone like to unmute themselves if they want to share their own experience? So someone has just put in that question: what is the lowest mortgage price you can input to gain a house currently in the UK?
So is that the lowest kind of deposit that you would need to put down, or the lowest?
The lowest mortgage price, sorry, did I say that? Yeah, the lowest mortgage price.
And I don't know if that person could maybe clarify that a little bit more. Lowest mortgage price.
So are they on about the difference between the clarification of a loan and a mortgage?
Yeah, well, I think this gentleman's on the call. Would you like to unmute yourself there and just, so the person said deposit price, please?
Usually around 5% would be a good percentage to work from. It's not often mortgage lenders offer more than a 95% mortgage now, like they did sort of 10 years ago or so. So I would be looking at least a 5% deposit. But obviously the higher the deposit, you know, the better interest rate that you may get. But I would say a minimum of 5% is a good ballpark.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that clarification. Another question here says, how easy is it to sell your shared ownership property if you don't have 100% ownership by the time you come to sell?
Okay, well, you've still got the two different options of selling your shared ownership property. So say if you owned 50% of the property, you can put that on the market for the 50% and you would just sell your 50% share, and One Manchester or whichever housing association it was would retain that 50% share. The other option that you have as a shared owner is to sell 100% of the property, even if you don't own it. So you would effectively, it's what we call simultaneously staircasing and assigning. So basically you would buy 100% of the property sort of seconds before you sold 100% of the property. So you don't actually need to get the borrowing yourself. The money would come from the purchaser, but you would have the option of still selling 100% as well as selling your 50%. So there are a couple of options there to make it a little bit easier to sell the property. It's not just the percentage that you own.
Thank you for that, Kate. Thank you for that clarification. I believe that answers that person there. So they're giving a thumbs up. Thank you for that you've answered their question. Another question from YouTube says, can you switch from rent to buy property, shared ownership on a different development with One Manchester? It's a good question.
So if you were a shared owner with One Manchester, you wouldn't be able to transfer to another shared ownership property because obviously you own the equity in that property. You know, you're the owner, you're not the tenant of that property. So you would be able to sell the property and buy another shared ownership property potentially, but you wouldn't be able to switch between shared ownership properties. Also bearing in mind that to qualify for shared ownership, you do actually need to not already own a property. So that probably would make it a little bit more complex. In terms of rent to buy, because that is a tenancy and there's no ownership at that point, potentially you could move to another rent to buy property. Obviously the rent could be different, but yeah, that is more of a potential in shared ownership.
Thank you for that question, Kate. And I hope that answers that person's questions as well. Please let us know if you need further clarification as well. I believe my team is on the call, so we can have that assistance as we're answering your questions. The next question here says, what are the rules with second home buyers?
Well, in terms of any of the low-cost home ownership products that I went through, so the Help to Buy, shared ownership and rent to buy, they're all designed for first-time buyers or helping people onto the housing ladder. So none of those could be purchased if you already had a property elsewhere. And I believe, Amy, that's the same for the right.
It's the same for the right to buy and right to acquire. So the presumption is that you're actually a social tenant to be entitled to right to buy or right to acquire. So you wouldn't own a property and then live in a social property. You would be a first-time buyer. Everything we've got is aimed at first-time buyers.
Okay. That's good, because that was actually going to lead me on to my next question. For those that have never had that experience, they don't own it. So for myself, don't currently own a property. What type of advice would you give for those that are trying to get onto the property ladder, especially with yourselves as One Manchester?
I think, really have a think about the area that you want to live in and what the options are in that area, because there is a lot out there now. Like I say, we build a lot of shared ownership. I know a lot of other housing associations build a lot of shared ownership. And, it is a really good way of getting onto the ladder. You only necessarily need to buy a 25% share. You still obviously need the deposit. You still need to be able to pay the mortgage, but it is a good foot onto the ladder, and you can always purchase further shares in future as well. If you've got that aspiration to purchase, but you're not quite there yet with the deposit, or, you don't necessarily 100% ready to commit to that purchase, then look for rent to buy, because that is a really good product for helping people onto the ladder. There's no legal obligation to buy the property. As long as you've got that aspiration, you are willing to work with us to save up for the deposit. That is a really good option for people to look at as well.
And I suppose with rent to buy as well, you sort of get a try before you buy. See if you like the area, see if you like the house, how does it fit for you? In terms of sort of right to buy and right to acquire, there's not really such a thing as shopping around. It's you've either got it or you haven't got it, depending on the property you live in, with the housing association or landlord that you have.
Okay, and then just on top of that, before I think someone's raised their hand in, before I bring that individual in, just from some of the, different, people that you've come into contact with, what are some of the learning curves that you've spotted, maybe a few mistakes people have made, or, different errors that people have made, and how would you advise those on the call that are joined today of, how to go about things, especially if it's their first time? I know you've mentioned one there, obviously doing your research is very key, and seeing the different opportunities, and obviously seeing your current situation and what the different schemes that are available, to yourself and to your circumstance. Well, is there anything else, having seen some of the clients that you've worked with, service users, is there anything else you would advise those on the call?
I'd say, sort of from the perspective of right to buy and right to acquire, speak to some sort of financial person first. Let them know that you have the right to buy or right to acquire. You can, if you speak to your housing association, you can get very sort of basic information that you can go to somebody financial with, just to get an understanding of what your sort of capabilities are. Because usually when you purchase a house, you'd speak to somebody financial first, find out what you can borrow, and then you'd look within your price range. Obviously with right to buy and right to acquire, it's a bit backwards. You don't know the price until you've sort of made that attempt to buy. So I'd say get your basic information and then speak to somebody, a mortgage advisor or your bank, and just find out as much as you can about what your lending capabilities are.
Agreed. Thank you. You're speaking to me there. Sorry, because I'm asking for myself. So I just wanted to know, hear from that experience.
I just Amy as well there, just on the financial side, because obviously if you were buying a new property, there's like hidden costs that you don't necessarily think about, like furniture. Most shared ownership properties, they don't come with any kind of carpet or anything, so that's a cost that people need to budget for. Carpets, blinds, furniture, that can all add up.
Oh yeah.
And again, if somebody's used to renting, where the housing association or the landlord has kind of the repairing obligation, once you are a shared owner or an owner, that repairing obligation is on you. So again, just making sure that you are kind of financially ready for any unexpected costs as well as the expected ones.
Okay. So you've heard that right there. Budget really wisely. Make sure you have a separate budget just for those additional costs. That I've heard that so many times, funny enough, and I think it's very important because we tend to just look at just the main housing, costs, and then we forget that so and so may say you need, like you said, a financial advisor, a mortgage may ask for this additional cost, and then the furniture. Because I always used to have that belief that it's all already furnished, and then I'm just going in. But yeah, that's really important that we know.
Carpets especially, it's very rare that a shared ownership property or any new property would come with carpeting, and that is probably like a big upfront cost for people as well. And it's something that I didn't think about when I bought my house. It did have carpets, but obviously I had the most uncomfortable sofa for about 6 months until I could save up for a nicer one, because I spent all my money on the mortgage and not thought about the sofa.
I've always found as well, things like fridge freezers can catch people out. So if you're living in a rented property at that time that's got a fitted fridge freezer or a fitted cooker, you're not taking that with you. So depends what you get in your next one. Just think about those. And then with right to buy and right to acquire, look into the cost of how much it's going to cost to repair things in your properties. It's not a brand new property. Once you go through that purchase, you will go on to restricted repairs. So it's not a case of get everything done before you sort of purchase. Remember that you can't just phone your landlord anymore and say, my boiler's gone. You've got to do those things yourselves.
Thanks for that. I believe Francesca, if you're still on the call there, had her hand raised. I think you want to share something. Yeah, go for it.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to ask, if you aren't a one Manchester tenant and you're in a different housing association, how easy is it to get one of these housing pathways into another housing association, or does it not matter if you're going for ownership of a property? I don't know if that makes sense.
If you're a housing association tenant with a different housing association, that's not any kind of barrier to applying to One Manchester for our shared ownership products or our rent to buy products. It's an even playing field when it comes to the application, so that wouldn't be an issue at all.
And then I suppose with right to buy and right to acquire, it's about the sort of demand for social housing. As we've had people sort of saying before, the housing list is quite big. You bid in for a substantial amount of time, and your only sort of other option is a mutual exchange, but you'd have to speak to your housing association and One Manchester to make sure that that was feasible between you and whoever you did it with.
Does that
okay? Thank you.
Is that okay for you, Francesca? Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
No problem. Thank you for that. So keep the questions coming in, guys. Please do send them in the chat box. For those, again, welcome. For those joining with us on Facebook, on YouTube, please do keep sending in your questions. And we want to hear from your experiences as well. But for those that have just joined, again, we just reiterate this event is more focused from the One Manchester's perspective for housing pathways as a housing provider. So please, as you're sending in your questions, please do take that into consideration as well. We have another question here. Someone says, hypothetically speaking, if I wanted to sell my shared ownership property, could I, for example, sell it to a friend, or would the housing association get a first refusal?
It would depend on the lease. Most of the time there is something in the lease as about offering the property back to the housing association first, or allowing the housing association to look to see if they've got a waiting list for that property. So check the lease first of all to see if there's anything in there about that. In terms of selling it to your friend, I mean, that's something that you could do, but because it's a shared ownership property, there's certain things that you would have to do before that stage. So you would still have to get it independently valued, and you would still have to sell the share at that independent valuation. So you couldn't kind of discount it to your friend, or, you know, do anything that's not within the spirit of shared ownership, should we say.
I hope that answers your question there. Or if you'd like to unmute yourself as well and add any further contribution to your question, that's also fine. I'll just move on to the next question. In which areas in Manchester do you have new builds, so new houses? Yeah, I'd like to know that, please.
Okay, so I feel like I'm doing a sales pitch now. So we've got, let's have a look. We sort of Gordon, Openshaw, those kind of areas are the ones that we're developing in. So we've got a big scheme on site on, it's called Chadwick Place, and that's on the edge of Gorton. And then we've also got Gorton Lane, which is unsurprisingly in Gorton. They're a mixture of shared ownership, market rent, and rent to buy.
Thank you.
But again, a lot of other the development team have been before, so just keep looking on our website because we update it when something goes on site.
Thank you for that. Yes, obviously, please do let us know any links, like I said before, please do share that in the chat. And then for my team that are on the call, please do share the One Manchester website link. So for those that don't know how to get on there, we can go away and do some further research and see the different areas that are currently have new builds as well.
For that one is to go on to the Help to Buy agent. So that's one of the links that I put into the presentation, and you can actually search for shared ownership by area there as well. So if you put in Manchester, that will show all the shared ownership schemes in Manchester for the different housing associations. So that's a way of looking as well.
No problem. We'll take note of that. But also as well, a copy of the slides may help as well. So for those links, if that's fine with yourselves, just so that people can go away and have a look at those various links. But also at the end of this call, if you can also type it in this chat box as well for people, then they can go away and have a look. I'm one of those people to go away and do my further research. Yes, we have another question here. It says, can you share what the best option from what you discussed would be for young adults to get a property? So I think that was going back to what we said about getting up to the property ladder for the first time, especially for our younger adults. It's their first time going into property. They may not have an understanding, of how to go about that. So yeah, it was just going back to my initial question of any tips, any quick, tips.
It really does depend on the circumstances of the person, because if somebody knows that they definitely want to buy, and they've got the deposit saved up, you might want to go straight for Help to Buy or straight for shared ownership. If you know that you want to buy, but you've not actually got a deposit saved up, but you know that you are able to, with your financial circumstances, to save a deposit over the next 5 or so years, then again, Rent to Buy is a really good option. So I suppose it depends on your circumstances at the time. If your mortgage, you could maybe get a bigger mortgage than a smaller one, then Help to Buy might be an option because you own the property outright effectively. Whereas obviously shared ownership is still the part rent, part buy elements. But again, on shared ownership, you do have the option to sort of buy more shares as well. So I would say it really depends on whether you want to buy now or in the future and kind of what you want to commit to really. But I think all three are great options for getting onto the housing ladder. There's not one that, I think is not great. I think they're all solid options.
And I think another question, just to adding on to that, since obviously, after the pandemic, has anything changed? Would you say, are there any, like you said, I think you mentioned it before, Amy, before that's, Kate, sorry, that there are some hidden costs. There's a few things that people may not be aware of that are trying to get onto the property ladder. And obviously since post-pandemic, things may have changed, prices may have gone up. Is there anything that you feel, as for those on the call, that we need to be made aware of when we're doing our research and, seeing what's out there?
Housing associations are very fair in terms of how we sell our property. So I think after the pandemic, we all saw that the housing market went a bit crazy and people were getting outbid on properties. Agents were putting crazy prices on the property or asking for offers over. If you're buying shared ownership with a housing association, you know what the price is going to be. There's no negotiation on that price. Once you've reserved that property at that price, you are buying that property at that price. So there's no offers over. You're not coming in to make an offer. You are buying at what is independently set as the value of that property. So it's not been set by an agent that wants more commission. You're not in a bidding war with somebody else, and we're kind of seeing how much more we can get from that property. It is very fair how the property is valued, and that it's valued independently for the property, and that is the price we will sell at. So I guess once you've reserved, you're safe in the knowledge that nobody's going to come and outbid you, and we're not going to put that up either.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. It's really good to hear that, because I think for some of us, we always used to have that, the mentality that, it's a competition. You have to keep bidding until you eventually get the house. But I think it's good to know, especially after the pandemic, things may have changed, and it's just good to know that, it's very much at that set price when you're looking at buying the house.
It's really popular, so there's still an element of kind of getting in there with your reservation, so definitely sort of do your research first, kind of have a think about your circumstances, your financial circumstances, to put yourself in a really strong position that if you do see something you want to reserve, you can reserve it quite quickly. Because I know our shared ownership, it's really popular in the areas that we're developing, and it does tend to get reserved and sold out quite soon after we've launched. So again, do your research, get your finances in order. But yeah, once we advertise a price, that is the price, and once you've made that reservation, there's no bidding war for it.
Thank you for that. So yes, again, welcome to those that have just joined. If anyone has any other further questions, please do keep them coming in the chat box. We'd love to hear from you, and for some of your experiences as well. We'd love to hear from you, and you can feel free to unmute yourself and you can share so that Amy and Kate can, comment or give any further feedback. Just a question that's just coming from YouTube. Help to Buy scheme is meant to end in 2003. Do you think it will be extended for another year or beyond?
I suppose, the government are very sort of keen on getting people onto the housing ladder at the moment, aren't they, and levelling up. So it may well be that they choose to extend it because that's kind of, what their manifest is at that time. So again, we don't have any say in that as a housing association, kind of that is sort of led by the government. But I wouldn't be surprised if obviously their aspiration is to help people onto the housing ladder, or maybe they'll do something similar or slightly different, but I wouldn't be surprised to see it extended.
We hope it gets extended. For those that are still trying to get on the property ladder, yeah, we don't. Hopefully it gets extended just so we can have enough time to get.
Yeah. Soon. I think most people are still developing a lot of shared ownership, so I think that's fairly solid going forwards.
Definitely. Does anyone else have any other questions, any further comments, feedback? How did everyone find today's session as well? We want to hear from you, so please do use the chat box to let us know how you found today's session. What are some of the learning curves for yourselves? What are some of the key takeaways you'll be taking away from today? Feel free to use that chat box and let our colleagues here know how you found today. Remember, this event as well is being streamed to Facebook and YouTube, so you can always go back and watch today's event and pick up on some of the learnings that we've learned from here today. So yes, just looking in the chat box to see if there's any other questions or any other feedback. I think people are still sending them in. So while we're waiting for that, Amy, do you have any other tips? I know you're really good with numbers, really crunching down the numbers. Do you have any other quick tips as well? I think from a financial perspective, obviously, how to advise people to get their finances in order when looking at property.
From my perspective, for the right to buy and right to acquire, ask your housing association. Because it is something that doesn't get updated a lot. Ask your housing association. They are the best people to ask if you have the right to buy or the right to acquire. It is different in every area. Well, Manchester has 3 different stock transfers. So whether or not a tenant has right to buy or right to acquire is dependent on their tenancy start date. So make sure you ask your housing association. Don't make a presumption. Speak to the team at your housing association to avoid any sort of disappointment in terms of what you have or haven't got.
Thank you for that. So you've heard that here. Ask questions. I think that's best to say. At least just ask. If you don't ask, you won't actually know the different opportunities that are available. So in the midst of you doing your research, definitely ask as many questions as you can. And forums like this, I think, is very important. It's very free. People can share their experiences and, you know, learn from one another. I think that's why it's really important when we're holding sessions like this, but definitely feel free to join, share with your families and friends so that we can all learn and see what opportunities are available. So we're really grateful to One Manchester to take out their evening this evening to share. Some people have already started putting feedback in the chat box, just saying how you've explained things very in depth. You've broke things down for people to understand. So we're really grateful for that. So thank you once again, Amy and Kate. I mean, is just there any final pointers? Any, just as we just wrap up, if there's any final tips, any final, you know, final words really.
Mine would be, if you don't ask, you don't get. To be honest, it would be, if you don't ask, you don't know. I mean, my personal experience, I didn't know anything about right to buy or right to acquire before I started my job. It turns out I myself had right to buy on my property and I purchased it this year. So for me personally, doing this job and finding out about something, I remember moving from one property to another within my housing association, and the actual housing officer mentioning to me about the right to buy, and I said, oh, I don't care, or I wasn't interested. I thought it was something that was donkeys years ago. Everybody got to buy their houses for 10 grand and it didn't apply to people my age. So I found out that it did apply to me and I've managed to become a homeowner through it. So definitely ask the question.
Yeah, no questions are stupid questions either. It's like, I'm conscious that obviously I deal with like these sales day in, day out. So like it's obvious to me sometimes, but it is complicated. I can see why people would be daunted or like, put off by applying for it. So, but we're all here to help. Every housing association is probably going to have a sales team or a commercial team, and everyone's there to answer questions. There's no stupid question. Genuinely, nobody's going to like roll their eyes at you or, why you're asking that. We're here to help people with the questions. We want to help you onto the housing ladder. That's what we're here to do. And again, most housing associations will have a ton of information on the website. So if you don't feel comfortable picking up the phone to ask, have a look on the website, search for shared ownership on, any housing association website, and there will be something there.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that, Amy. Thank you for that as well, Kate. Yes, I think we just as we draw this session to a close, I think we've heard it, firsthand here today. Research.
Definitely.
Ask questions. Ask as many questions as you like. Attend forums such as this, where we hold these type of sessions where you can feel free to engage, interact, and share experiences so we can learn from each other. And more so, definitely ask questions to your housing provider. I think that's very important. Obviously, One Manchester has shared from their own perspective, but if you're with a different housing provider, definitely feel free to ask them the questions as well and see what opportunities are available for yourselves. And then more from a financial perspective, I believe Amy touched on it earlier, making sure we're saving. And we're talking to, I know Amy called it a financial person, to ask if our finances are in order, how much more we need to save to get to where we need to be. And more so, as we're saving, making sure we're having a separate pot that is for the extra additional costs that aren't shown when we're trying to find a suitable home. So, yes. So yeah, make sure you have that. I'm definitely going to take that pointer away. I think we've got one more person. David, do you just want to quickly share before we wrap up? I think David wants to unmute himself to ask one other question. David, are you there?
Sorry, it was just to thank you. Sorry. It was not a question.
No problem. So that's just another thank you as well. So everyone's really grateful. So other than that, we'd love to say thank you once again, Amy. Thank you again, Kate. Thank you to One Manchester as well. So that's one of our partners here at CAHN. We've really enjoyed working with yourselves to host engaging forums such as this. And then thank you once again to those that have joined with us on Facebook and on YouTube. Once again, this event has been recorded, so you can always go back to our CAHN Facebook page or YouTube channel, and you can always go back and share this link as well today with family and friends. I believe my colleagues are already sharing some useful links in the chat box, so feel free to have a look at that as well. On top of that, we look forward to seeing you all as well later on in the week for some of our other engaging events. My colleagues will share those links as well in the chat box as well. But please do let us know, how did you find today's session? You know, would you like to see more of this? What are some other questions you have? You can always email us at events@cahn.org.uk. We want to hear feedback from you so that we can know how to plan more engaging sessions like this as well. So please do feel free to contact us throughout the week as well. Our helpline is available. So if you need any extra support, want someone to talk to, have further questions, you can always email us at help@cahn.org.uk. And I believe my colleagues have sent in some of our contact details in the chat box. We will thank everyone once again, and we hope everyone has a lovely remainder of the week. And yes, we'll sign out. Thank you. Have a lovely evening.
Bye.
Bye. Bye, everyone.